Thank you, Chaplain White, for that, getting us started here. So truly, one of the best parts of my job is getting to be up on stage with these incredibly talented, hugely recognized people who share a love for this school. And it's really such an honor to have Ms. Vivian Howard here today. So this is our third annual Lee and Dorothy Thomas Speaker Series. And as you know, in the past, we've had Erskine Bowles, Bill Harrison, and now Vivian Howard, class of 96. And this has been such an incredible tradition for us, and I think you're going to really enjoy today's presentation. Joining Ms. Howard on stage is Mrs. Kitty Sidner, better known as William and Hampton's mom. But she also joins us today as a longtime friend of our guest, Vivian Howard. And Kitty, let me be the first to thank you for your help with today's presentation. We're really looking forward to a fantastic conversation. The other person I want to recognize, and I don't know if he's, oh, here he is, Mr. Jim Hopkins, our long-tenured English professor, is here. And you all probably know him better because he is the Hopkins of the Hopkins Writing Center, and all of those charcoal sketches on the wall, as well as the portrait of the VS campus that hangs behind my desk, are all his work. And so his impact on so many generations of VS students, and he is one of the people that I know inspired Vivian to want to tell stories and be a writer, and you did a great job. So a little bit about Vivian. She's a native of Eastern North Carolina, so she's got a lot in common with many of you. She's from Deep Run. She's a member of the class of 1996. She spent the last 2 decades of her life investing her time, talent, and treasure to become the accomplished and award-winning cookbook author, TV personality, chef, and restaurateur. So she is a 5-time semifinalist for the James Beard Foundation Best Chef Southeast Award for her work in her flagship restaurant, The Chef and the Farmer in Kinston. She earned a Daytime Emmy, a Peabody Award, and a James Beard Award for Outstanding Personality and TV Host for her documentary television series, A Chef's Life. And her first cookbook, Deep Run Roots, Stories and Recipes from My Corner of the South, is a New York Times bestseller and was named Cookbook of the Year by the International Association of Culinary Professionals. But even more, having shared a little time with Vivian last night at dinner and at breakfast this morning, we've had a few phone calls. I don't pretend to know her well, but I do know her by reputation. And so one of our core values at VES is that spirit of selfless service. And when I think about what she has done for Eastern North Carolina and Kinston in wanting to give back and help build that community, it's really inspirational. And not only what she has done for that community, but also in her storytelling and elevating the stories of the people who grow the food and the people who raise the hogs, and shining light on the dignity of their labor and their work in such a beautiful way. And so when we talk about giving back and wanting to build a better community, I think nobody embodies that more than you, Vivian. And it's such a pleasure to welcome you and Kitty here today. And I'll stop talking so we can get on with the show. But thank you.
Hey there, everyone. How are you? Vivian, you ready?
I'm ready.
Well, first of all, how does it feel to be back at VES?
It is really kind of surreal because I know people say this all the time, but it just feels like yesterday. And I in many ways, so many things have not changed here, and so many things have. And after graduating, I hadn't come back really until about 5 years ago. So it's all been incredibly full of nostalgia for me. And my kids, they were wearing headphones on the way up here, but I had several anecdotes about, oh, this and oh, that. And so I'll make them take them off on the way home. So.
Well, I guess you just had a tour of campus today.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, what do you think? I mean, it seems like yesterday, I know, and a lot's the same. But what do you think about the progress? What stood out?
I feel like I missed out on a lot. I mean, I already knew that. Like shortly after I graduated, they put in that pool down there, and I understand that you don't get to use it much because of the season, but the pool, the gym, the new the Smith building. I mean, it's a completely different campus almost, and I never had any trouble figuring out what to do around here, but now it seems like it would be a lot easier.
Yeah. Would have been nice to have a pool.
Yes.
Well, I wanted you to just kind of let everybody know a little bit more about your background. If you could talk about where you grew up in Eastern North Carolina and how that impacted your education, and kind of if that played a part in helping you decide to pursue a boarding school path.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I grew up, I know a lot of y'all grew up in Eastern North Carolina, and if not in Eastern North Carolina, likely some rural places like it. And my parents were tobacco and hog farmers, and I had 3 sisters that were much older than I. And so I kind of grew up alone, kind of only child in the house, and because I was in a rural place, I didn't have a lot of friends that came over to play, and as early as I can remember, I was like plotting my exit, and my sister, one of my sisters, had gone to an all-girls boarding school, and I grew up watching this show that none of y'all are gonna know what it is, but it's called The Facts of Life, and it took place at an all-girls boarding school, and the characters were Natalie, Tootie, Blair, and Joe. And I saw myself at this school, and so it was never a question for me whether or not I wanted to go to boarding school. But what was interesting is that, my parents were farmers. They sacrificed for me to be able to go there. But everybody, when they learn you go to boarding school, they ask what you did to get in trouble. But I wanted in my high school experience to be around different types of people, to be, I really wanted to be in a town where I could go to a mall, if I'm being honest. So yeah, boarding school was a way for me to, to have new experiences and meet new people, and what really happened is I fell in love with learning.
Well, other than the mall being in Lynchburg, what else?
The mall.
Yeah. What else kind of made you choose VES?
Well, I went to the same school that my sister had gone to, Salem Academy, and after 2 years there, I wanted to transfer. There were some things that happened at the school that affected that, but also growing up in a family with all girls and then going to an all-girls school, I was really, I wanted to be in a co-ed environment, and I'd always heard about VES, and my mom and I came up here to visit one day, and I remember we pulled up at Front Jet, and I saw these 2 guys like walking up the steps, and they had like shaggy hair, and I was like, we don't even need to do the visit, Mom, I'm coming here. It was, but the thing that was really different about VES versus Salem was that this felt like, a boarding school that you would see in the movies. And clearly I had lived my life through television and movies before I went to boarding school. I loved that the teachers and the faculty largely lived on campus and ate in the dining hall with us, and it made it feel like more of a familial environment. And they were always kind of around, you know, if you needed, you know, help with something, you could bother them, and it seemed like it was part of their job. And so, yeah, I love that about it.
Well, looking back all those years ago when you were here, I can't believe it, but I guess that's 28 years ago, so 1996. What do you remember most fondly, would you say, your most fond memories about being here?
Just like the very intense, deep friendships that I made, and how we really felt like a second family, and the way that I kind of learned to take care of myself, you know, not only picking up after myself, but organizing my time, pursuing things that interested me. This felt like a very open environment to do that. And, you know, but really I think the time spent on dorm, hanging out with people, and just forging really, really deep friendships that I still have today. When I walked into the main office at Front Jet and took a photo and sent it to some of my old VES friends saying, you know, look where I am. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about your friends and those relationships that you built, and obviously you're still in touch with those folks, and, you know, just how those relationships have evolved over time, and how they've impacted your life.
Yeah, and I think that being in an environment like this makes you not only have really close friendships, but it allows you to be a better friend, too, because you're going through certain things here and your parents aren't always there to helicopter over you. And I think that's a good thing, honestly, because the whole point of education is, and the whole point of parenting is to raise adults that contribute to society and can take care of themselves.
That's right. Well, let's pivot and talk about what kind of student you were. What subjects did you enjoy the most, and how did your education here prepare you for college, would you say?
Well, first of all, I learned to study here, and to manage my time. And my favorite subjects were English and history. And Latin, not because I loved it, but there were only 3 of us, and I loved the teacher, and it was enjoyable. But, you know, I loved the small class sizes here, and the fact that many of them, particularly the English classes, were around a table and non-traditional in many ways. And it did feel like certain teachers were our friends, and so there was a comfortability in the classroom to share, and a lack of fear. But definitely English. You know, Mr. Hopkins I came as a junior, and immediately I could tell among my peers, you can tell which teachers are revered and loved, and I could tell that every single one of my classmates wanted Mr. Hopkins to like them, to think they were a good writer or a smart reader, and I wanted that, you know, more than anyone probably, and so Mr. Hopkins, we had my history teacher, Mr. Smith. You know, Mr. Hopkins had this warmness and this coolness, and you wanted to be around him. Mr. Smith wasn't like that. But, I mean, I did not even, like, take notes in his class because he was such an amazing storyteller, and he would just, you know, spin tales about the French Revolution that I still remember. I was in his former classroom this morning, and I can remember sitting there and just being enraptured. And I think that is just such a great gift. And teachers, like, of that quality have like a lifelong impact. I really believe that when I say I learn to love to learn here, it's not that I'm a bookworm or I do a lot of extra study, but it piqued my curiosity and really let me know that learning and being able to share what you learn can be really fun.
Right. Well, you spoke about Mr. Hopkins, who's here today. I had the pleasure of meeting him last night, and he taught English here for 44 years. And you referenced that he did impact your life quite a bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about him and more examples of what it was like in his class?
Yeah, he was the type of teacher who always just encouraged you to do it. And he could always tell if you had cut corners or had not kind of pushed yourself, and he would call you out on it in front of everyone. And he's like, "That's not it, babe." And he made us do a lot of reading aloud in class of our work and critiquing and talking about other people's work. And I think that made me more open to criticism in a lot of ways, and also understanding how constructive criticism and looking at things again and again is a really important process in doing something well. But I don't think that he ever sketched me, so I am. That's another takeaway.
Well, you were here at VS during a time where there was little, if any, access to technology, which is something these kids can't understand probably. But there were, if you were going to get out and about, there were organized events, and and student life activities were limited to a mall bus. You got to go to the mall, and wherever Allied Cab would take you. So, given those circumstances, what did you and your friends do for fun that you can tell us about?
Yeah, my children are here. So we took a lot of cabs to the Yellow Sub, which I don't know if that's still a place that y'all go, but it was a sandwich shop. Nothing really special about it, except that they would let us sit there for hours and just drink Coca-Cola. And so we would go to the Yellow Sub. The Cav was a really fun place to spend time.
It's still here. Have you been?
Yeah. And we had a standing appointment with Beverly Hills 90210, which was like, we didn't have as many things to watch either as y'all do. So there was like everybody watched the same thing. So, and it came on TV at a certain time, and you had to watch it then. So I guess appointment television would have been something that we had. And, I don't know if this is something that would have happened if I had not gone to boarding school, but at both Salem and at VES, I took to entertaining people, and other people would entertain. We would like turn on music and like sit out in the hall, and I would run up and I would dress funny and run up and down the hall and dance and so we did a lot of our, we were our own phones, I guess. We entertained each other. We listened to a lot of music. I had some really good day student friends. So I more often, in my senior year, rather than, taking cabs, I would rely on my day student friends. And we did some hiking, I would say. I didn't think of it as hiking then. It was really like, how can we get away from school and be in the woods? But today I'd call it hiking.
Yeah. Well, I do remember you dancing a lot at fraternity parties. She loved to do pirouettes at fraternity parties.
And one thing I realized as I've gotten older is I was not nearly as good at any of that as I thought I was.
Yes, you were. Speaking of your career, you wear a lot of hats in your career. Celebrated chef, award-winning TV personality, writer, entrepreneur. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so you know, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. You know, in my house, you know, when I would get in trouble or when something would not go my way, I would write a little account of it from my perspective and like leave it on the kitchen table and then leave the house for a while. And then I would, you know, enter, and once I could tell that the mood had shifted, then, you know, everybody would celebrate my story and it would become this like kind of, you know, laugh. So I learned early on that I could manipulate situations or help move through the world through the stories that I told. And at school, you know, they always said I was a good writer. And so I think for no other reason, I decided I wanted to be a writer. And then that was reinforced with amazing teachers like Mr. Hopkins. And then just continuing to try to pursue that. In college, I did an internship at CBS Sunday Morning, which is a news show. I know none of y'all know that. And decided that I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer of some kind. So after college, I moved to New York to pursue that, but I did not get a job in journalism. It was way harder than I thought. And I started working in advertising, and 9/11 happened, and much like happened with a lot of people in the pandemic, I decided that I did indeed not want to be in the career that I was in, and that I wanted to do something that really, you know, lit me up. And so I was like, you know, I moved here to be a writer. I'm going to try to do this. So what do a lot of writers or actors or whatever do? They go work in restaurants. And so I had always worked in restaurants in college. And so I started working in a restaurant, but this was a very specific place. And, you know, I don't believe in, you know, things like this, but it was kind of kismet in that, you know, I was from the American South, or I grew up in a rural place, and this was a restaurant in 2002 in Manhattan that the concept of the restaurant was Southern food via Africa. And, you know, that's something that we talk about a lot today, but it's not something that anyone really discussed back then. And this chef was an amazing storyteller. And what I took from that whole experience training to be in that restaurant was how much all the stories behind the dishes, all the history behind the dishes, all the history behind the tea and the wine that we served, how like that made me so excited. And so I decided that I would try to translate that career in this that experience in this restaurant into a career in food writing. So I started working in the kitchen in the mornings for free until my shift on the floor as a server, where I made my actual money. And I did that with the intent to be a writer, but what I learned was like I enjoyed working with my hands. I liked being on a team where we kind of worked toward success or failure together. I'd never played team sports. I was the men's lacrosse manager here, however. And I was on the volleyball team, but I wasn't good enough to really feel like a team member, probably. But so I love that aspect of it. So I just kept cooking, and it was a lot easier to get a job cooking than writing. And then I started a little soup business out of my apartment. My soon, eventually to be husband and it was called Biv's Kitchen. And I would make soup and send an email out on Sundays to all of my friends, people that I knew, and say, these are the soups I'm making this week. And they would place their orders, and I would go to the grocery store and make these big vats of soup in my apartment in Brooklyn, in Harlem, and go shopping for all the ingredients, make the soup, and then chill it down in the bathtub because it was way too much soup to go in a refrigerator. And then on my day off, we would go around the city delivering the soup, and it gained a little following. And somebody wanted to write about it in Time Out New York, and then somebody wanted to invest in like an actual restaurant for us because you couldn't write about it in Time Out New York because I was making it in my apartment. And that led to us like deciding that we were going to open a real restaurant in New York. And then my family just said, absolutely, we never thought that you would actually settle somewhere other than here, which I thought was so ironic because, as I said earlier, my parents had sacrificed to give me all these opportunities for education all over the place. And then they thought that I would choose to move right back to Deep Run. So I did. And yeah, we moved back to Eastern North Carolina to open this restaurant that we both thought would be a temporary thing. And it turned out to be, we put everything that we had into it. Eastern North Carolina had changed a lot since I had left. It was once a very rich and prosperous place, and textiles and tobacco trade had left, and there was a major brain drain there, and I moved back to a place that I really didn't recognize. And so Chef and the Farmer, our original goal with it was not only to run a profitable business or a restaurant, but to also help help old tobacco farmers become people who grow produce or proteins or produce niche cheeses. So that was the name Chef and the Farmer, and that is what we worked toward doing. And, surprisingly, being in this rural place, we were very busy from the beginning because people wanted to come and see what the hell this looked like, I think. And we were putting everything we had into it, and it was really good, and people from Raleigh wrote about it, and so we had a successful restaurant on our hands, and it was not going to be a temporary thing living in Eastern North Carolina. But I still really wanted to be a writer. Like, I never gave up on that. And even though I'd moved back to Eastern North Carolina and I kind of felt like a failure to some degree, I decided early in that process that what I was going to do was going to be great no matter where it was. I was not going to allow my location to determine the quality and the reach of my work. And that's kind of like been one of my mantras. And that's why we made an excellent restaurant in the middle of nowhere. And so I still really wanted to be a writer, and I decided to look at where I was as an opportunity and not a liability. And I started writing about the dying food traditions of Eastern North Carolina, things like putting up corn or making collard kraut or making biscuits from scratch. And then I decided that I wanted to make a documentary about this. And so I reached out to a childhood friend who grew up right there, who had become a documentary filmmaker, and asked if she would help with it. And so we started making this documentary, and she was like, this is going to be a snooze fest if it's about what you want it to be about. So I think it'd be a lot more interesting if it was about you and the work that you do. And you can include all these things that you're interested in, but you as a person are a more interesting follow for a viewer. So we made this show, A Chef's Life, but I'll tell you this very quickly because people always ask, like, how did you get discovered by PBS? And, the answer is nobody has ever discovered me. And everything I've ever gotten, I've asked for. And so, in making this show for PBS, eventually we sent this sizzle reel to PBS, and they said, oh, we like this. You need to make 13 of them, 13 24-minute versions, and then we will view them and decide whether or not we want to distribute them. And so that means, like, they don't give you any money to do that. And so we had to go out and raise all the money to make this show. And we couldn't. We did what's considered like a Kickstarter campaign and raised $80,000, and our budget was $1 million. But we had already started filming this. Cynthia, the director, was committed. I was committed. And then a few other production team members really started to believe in the project and believed that what we were making was not just TV. It was a way to highlight rural people and people, particularly in Eastern North Carolina, in a way that had never been done. If you see rural people on TV, they usually are either like mystical fairies or they're chewing on their toenails. And so we wanted to show our community for what it was for. And we also wanted to show the restaurant business in a light that it had never been shown. And so we believed in it, and so we made the show without the money. and nobody got paid, and we made this really amazing 13 episode series that we never thought anyone was ever going to watch. And, you know, typically when shows are on PBS, they air in about 60% of markets because every station can decide whether or not they want to air it and when they want to air it. But the first season of A Chef's Life aired in 98% of markets because it spoke to all of those programmers in such a way. And so that season won a Peabody Award, which is very unusual. I didn't even know what it was when they told me. So, it's the highest honor in media, really. And so after that, we were able to raise the funds to produce additional shows. But I tell you all that because you're young people, and I think the understanding in culture is that if you don't have the money to do something, you don't pursue it. And I think what I learned through this is that if you really believe in it and it's important, then you should do it anyway, or at least try.
Yeah. So, you know, you're a storyteller, whether it's in the kitchen working with your hands and the food that you put out to people, whether, you know, you're writing, filmmaking. Would you say, I mean, observing, it seems like it all comes so naturally to you, but would you say that any of these roles are easier, or is there one that you just say, I mean, just listening to you now, maybe you would say you're a writer first and foremost, but.
Well, no, I mean, I think the word storyteller is very overused today, but I would say that is at my core, that's what I do. So I feel comfortable owning that, you know, because for years, you know, my profession is I'm a chef. I'm a respected chef, but I always felt like I was faking as a chef. And the things that I feel like I'm most successful at with my cooking are the stories behind the food and the reason that I make the particular dish. There's a reason I wrote a 700-page cookbook that is more narrative than recipe. Yeah, so I think that that's what I do best, you know, whether it be in a recipe or on the page or in conversations. There's you know, a certain type of protection in being a storyteller too. Yeah.
So kitchen culture and restaurant work, as you know, often perceived as being a predominantly masculine industry. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like being a woman in such a competitive, cutthroat industry in New York in particular. I'm sure that was something.
Yeah, you know, as I just said, I always felt like a fake chef. So that was even really harder for me being in, you know, at that level in restaurants in New York. But, you know, I get that question a lot as a female chef who has seen a lot of success. And for a long time, I kind of just answered it very briefly by saying I never really experienced that. I always felt like my biggest liability as a cook or anyone was that I was from the country, and I had an accent, and I felt inferior for that reason, and so I never led with like my issue is I'm a woman. Yeah. I was always concerned that I wasn't taken seriously because I had an accent, or I was from the South, or I was from a farm, but that's not to say, you know, I was telling a group this morning that I did an internship at what was largely the most forward-thinking restaurant in New York at the time called WD50, and the internship lasted 6 months, and I applied to stay on, and they agreed to keep me on, and my sous chef said, we're going to keep you on, but you know it's only because you're attractive. And I said, in my mind, I said, great. Because, and I want to qualify this, because I knew what I looked like, I knew what my skills were, and I also knew what I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to work in that restaurant, And if that was one thing that was going to allow me to stay there, then I was going to stay there knowing that and continue doing my work. Because to me, it really didn't matter why I was there, as long as I got to stay. And I got what I needed out of it. And years later, that same sous chef, we had both been nominated for this organization's Star Chefs. And he had a restaurant in Chicago, and I had my restaurant in Kinston, and we were in the same class of, star chefs, and it was not because what I looked like.
You've well documented your professional challenges over the years. I remember you had a fire that destroyed your restaurant in 2012, and as you talked about earlier, your TV show had no funding, and you didn't have any experience. And I know you had to close during the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit more about how that, just a little bit about that?
About what exactly?
Oh, sorry, just about, your professional challenges, the fire, just some things like that where things seem to be going along just fine, and then, you can have something major happen like that, impact you, and you have to pivot and figure out what to do.
Yes. That... Chef and the Farmer, after being open about 5 years, our kitchen burned, and we had to close for about 8 months, and that definitely felt like a major setback. And it felt like we had just gotten our legs. We were about to get some really good press, and it felt as if we had to start all over again. But I also recognize that, looking back, the fire was probably one of the best things that ever happened to the restaurant, because we had been filming the series at that point, and we had made this one episode, and once we had this, the fire made people interested in the restaurant, and it gave the show an audience that I don't think that it would have ever had, really. And so it's weird to look at something that was terrible and tragic in that way, but I think that when you get on the other side of something really hard like that, that is what you see. And I would say that the pandemic is the same. And what I've learned through all of that is that, no matter how much success you feel like you've built or how much credibility you feel like you've built in your work, all you have is the last thing that you did and what you're going to do next. Because this is the world that we live in now is everything is so transient. And I thought 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that I really would not have to hustle in the way that I am hustling today. Really rebuilding and reimagining the work that I do from the ground up. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do that, because I think a lot of people can't do that. But there's no end, and there's no there's no place where you're safe and successful, I don't think.
Right. Well, one of those things that you did so entrepreneurial of you. Well, everything is, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Viv's Fridge.
Oh, yeah.
And because that was such a unique and interesting thing and I'd love to know how you thought of that, how it's going, and when we can get one at VES.
Yeah. Well, so Viv's Fridge is an idea that I had during the pandemic, when we were all at home, and I felt like what I was doing was cooking and cleaning and cooking and cleaning and cooking and cleaning. And I really appreciated the idea of a well-made, from scratch, delicious meal that felt like something I wouldn't make at home. Mm-hmm. And so that combined with this idea that a restaurant like Chef and the Farmer that is only open for dinner service, so we're open from 5 until 11. Essentially, we have people working in that restaurant from 6 a.m. until 2 a.m. And the problem is that a big chunk of that time, you're not bringing in any revenue at all. And then the other problem with restaurants like Chef and the Farmer is that it's a young person's job. You're working at night, you're on your feet, there's fire, it's very stressful. So I would get all this talent, these talented cooks who eventually would wise up and say, I don't want to work at night anymore. Can you open a bakery? And so I had, those two problems on my hands. Like, how do I make this building that we're in more profitable by bringing in revenue all day long? And how do I graduate my talented cooks into daytime hours if they want to do something as outlandish as have a family? And so the fridges really do that. So we have meals and snacks and sides that are packaged for up to 4 people. That allows us to have a high price point. So we have items in there that are $85 sometimes. And the idea is then in an existing restaurant, you're able to produce the food for the fridges during the day that would generate revenue during the day while other people are also there prepping for dinner service. And rather than building another commissary kitchen to accommodate this, you do it in the kitchen that you've already invested in. So for me, the fridges are not only solve a consumer problem, but they really address places in the restaurant, a specific type of restaurant that we could be more profitable.
Where all are your locations?
So we have one in Emerald Isle, one in New Bern, one in front of Chef and the Farmer, and there are 5 in the Triangle.
Okay. Any more on the horizon, like VS?
Well, the idea is that, the idea is that all the food is made in that restaurant kitchen, and you use the ingredients and the team that you have in place there. So it's not something that is meant to be very big.
Right.
But what I would like is for other restaurants like this to look at the model, because it's a way to, to generate revenue when you don't have a person there, collecting it. And it makes a lot of sense for a certain type of restaurant.
Right.
So in that way, it could be very big. So you could have the restaurant where we had dinner last night, they could have fridges here. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So you've traveled extensively in the United States and abroad, which seems to be often a source of inspiration for so many chefs, and I know for you in a lot of regards. But you've made a career of uplifting the community from where you came from, and that's something I don't think we see a lot of in the media, enough of, and it's so nice to see that you have drawn inspiration from that area in your life, and that you're living there now, that you went back. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about what inspires you there, and just a little bit more about that, drawing inspiration from Deep Run, Eastern North Carolina.
That I don't think that I would ever have been inspired by Eastern North Carolina had I not left and lived a good amount of life. And also, so I think that one of the reasons I'm able to draw inspiration from Eastern North Carolina is because I find that it's much easier to learn and to translate, to manifest what you learn when you have guardrails, if that makes sense. So in terms of food, if I were just a chef in anywhere and you said make a menu, like I couldn't do it. Like there are too many options. So I need a very narrow focus. And so living in Eastern North Carolina and realizing that something a professor of mine told me once, it was a writing professor. He said, you need to write what you know, and you don't know anything, so you need to write about yourself. And so to that point of, feeling like a fake chef, and then moving back to Eastern North Carolina and having that that complex, if you will. It was like, okay, if I don't really know how to cook, what is the thing that I can cook that nobody else really can? You know, how can I inhabit a real voice as a chef? And so the guardrails of Eastern North Carolina have allowed me to be inspired by it. And now, you know, one of the questions I get a lot is like, why do you still live there? And, you know, the answer is like the permanence of it. And y'all are really probably too young to realize this, but like at a certain point, for a certain type of person, it feels really good to like plant a fruit tree and then see it fruit. You know, it feels really good to make an improvement on your house and know that it's going to be your last house. Mm-hmm. It feels really good to like know a place and the seasons of it so well that you can break it into micro seasons. Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like I have enough opportunity in my life to travel elsewhere and to have a variety of experiences that the guardrails of Eastern North Carolina feel really good to me.
Yeah. Well, just circle. Oh, well,
I hate
finish.
to interrupt
No,
the conversation,
okay. No.
but I thought we got about 15 minutes left. Maybe we could turn it over and see if the audience has any questions.
Sure.
And let's repeat the questions so we can capture it on the audio.
Okay, absolutely. Do we have any questions for Vivian? It's kind of hard to see, so if you do, wave your hands.
We've got one right there, Kitty.
Oh, let's see. Where? Let's see, raise your hand again. Okay, right there in the back. What was the food like when you were a student here? That's a good one.
It was better than the first boarding school I went to. No, I remember the food being really good, and what I liked about it was that there was like variety, and I had the autonomy to choose what I wanted. So, you know, maybe I didn't enjoy like the food all the time, but I like being able to make the choices. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know what? There was no DoorDash or I'm not even sure that Domino's delivered here back then.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, ma'am.
What
What's
is
your
my favorite food and what's my favorite thing to cook? So my favorite food.
That's hard.
Well, like if I could go and eat in any type of restaurant, like I love Korean food. I love Japanese food. I love Indian food. The last type of restaurant I would like to go eat in is probably Southern food. And I think that's all because I just love experiencing, you know, new flavors. And I also learn a lot from eating other cultures' cuisine. Like I love to look at, you know, a dish that is Asian and is focused on cabbage, and then think about cabbage being an ingredient in Eastern North Carolina, and how can I draw a connection between those two things. My favorite thing to cook, my children are here. At home, I make a lot of like taco bowls and that kind of thing, but I guess I like to experiment. And I've always had a pastry chef at my restaurant, and in the last 6 months we've parted ways, and so I have picked up all the baking and the pastry, and I'm actually enjoying it. I'm not that great at it yet, but yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
You are a storyteller, whether you think it or not. The phrase you used back then, we were our own phones. Is that something you just thought of? I've never heard of that. Or have you heard that from someone else?
Oh no, I just thought of that. I was trying to think of like.
That is spot on.
Yeah, because I was thinking, you know, I mean, I have 2 kids that are roughly the age of students here, and like, a lot of what they do is like communicating with their friends on their phones too, or just like getting feedback, or like, yeah, that's what we were. And we were in front of each other all the time.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, right here.
What was your favorite thing like that you did in that
Well, they're going to hate that I'm telling you this.
What was your favorite thing that you did here at VES?
Yeah,
Is that right?
what was my favorite thing that I did here at VES? And this was not my favorite thing that we did, but I think it's something that's changed, is that as a senior, we did a lot of harassing on the campus. I mean, it was planned. I mean, you know, it was kind of in the school schedule, like this week is drive a car into the dining hall week. This week is, oh, sorry. This week is, there used to be this water tower here that we would break out of our dorms in the middle of the night and climb the water tower and then spray paint it with our names.
I don't think you're supposed to do that
Yeah,
anymore.
there was a lot of, as seniors, there was a lot of breaking out of dorm at night to vandalize the property.
You are absolutely not allowed to do that.
You can't do that now, though, because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't know how to without your phones.
That is true. Let's see. Yes, right here.
Yes, girl, it did.
Oh, let's read.
And my favorite thing to do was go to Cinnabon. And I spent a lot of time at Express and the Limited too. And I also, you know, one of the things that's really special about boarding school is that you can make decisions that you couldn't make if you were living in your mama's house. And on one of my first trips to the mall, I went to Sheer Pleasure. I had long hair, long pretty hair, and I went to Sheer Pleasure, which was a salon, and I got that stuff cut off. And I wish that I had someone helping me make that decision. Yeah, I had a lot of fun at the mall.
Let's see. Yes.
During your time at VES, what was something that you would do differently?
That's a good question. She said, "What during my
No,
I'm going to think about the answer while you say that."
that's okay. What's something, did you say, what's something looking back that you would do differently at VES? Good one.
Well, this is something that I would do differently all throughout my life is, you know, all those times that we were like sitting on dorm, like a little bit bored, you know, being each other's phones, thinking about, you know, when we might go to college or whatever the next milestone was. Like, I really wish I had like sat in that and appreciated it more and enjoyed just the experience of you know, being here, rather than the experience of when this ends here.
The next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Let's see. Is that Finn back there? Uh-oh.
If I were ever offered a cheesy Western in what context? Oh. Well, I hadn't thought about it till now, but that's a really good idea, because you know why? Because that is a story that you know, the people interacting with my guests can share about my past, which will make that cheesy Western taste even better than it would served from Ma over there. Isn't that what you call her?
Ma.
Okay.
All right.
That was amazing. Thank you.